This is BBC One Scotland. Now the BBC News with Jane Hill and Reporting Scotland with Graham Stewart.
The Queen misses the Remembrance Day ceremony in London after spraining her back. The Prince of Wales and other members of the royal family attend the commemorations at the Cenotaph to remember those who've lost their lives in conflict. Buckingham Palace said the Queen was disappointed to miss today's service. Also on the programme. One person has died after a car exploded outside Liverpool Women's Hospital. Counter-terrorism police are investigating. The head of the COP26 climate conference says the countries that watered down commitments to reduce coal use have questions to answer.
At the end of the day, China, India are going to have to explain themselves to the most climate vulnerable countries in the world, and you saw the reaction of the climate vulnerable countries to that change.
And a win for Chelsea over Manchester City narrows the gap at the top of the Women's Super League. Hello, good evening. The Queen has missed the annual Remembrance Day service at the Cenotaph in London for the first time in 22 years after spraining her back. Buckingham Palace said the Queen was disappointed not to be able to attend what would have been her first public engagement for more than 3 weeks. The Prince of Wales laid a wreath on the Queen's behalf at one of the many events around the UK to honour those fallen in conflict. Our royal correspondent, Nicholas Witchell, has this report.
It was the customary Cenotaph commemoration after the limitations last year caused by the pandemic. There was, though, one notable absentee. The Queen did not, as had been expected, take her place on a balcony overlooking the Cenotaph. According to Buckingham Palace, she had sprained her back. She continues to rest at Windsor. The Prince of Wales led other senior members of the royal family to their places at the Cenotaph in readiness for the 2-minute silence observed in Whitehall and at ceremonies around the country. After the 2-minute silence and the sounding of the last post in Whitehall by Royal Marine buglers, the Prince of Wales placed the Queen's wreath of red poppies against the Cenotaph's northern face, in tribute to those from Britain and the Commonwealth who lost their lives in the world wars and more recent conflicts. Then, after the official wreath-laying, it was the return of the Veterans' March Past. The former servicemen and women denied the chance to be at the Cenotaph last year, paying their own tributes to former colleagues. The head of state had been absent, a matter of great regret, we're told, to her and to those who were on parade.
And Nick is with me. And as you say, a genuine disappointment for the Queen not to be at the Cenotaph.
Unquestionably, not least, of course, because it refocuses attention on the whole question of her health. The palace will have been hoping that an appearance at the cenotaph would have reassured people. Now, we rely, as ever, on what the palace tells us. They say she sprained her back, that this happened recently. They say it is unrelated to the doctor's advice of 3 weeks ago for her to rest, when, of course, she also had hospital tests. We understand that she was deeply disappointed not to be able to attend this significant event, the first time for more than 20 years. It really is the most solemn event duty of the royal year. Nobody regrets her absence more deeply than she does, according to one palace source. Now, we were told that it was her firm intention to attend. It was one of the reasons why she was resting for 3 weeks, to be well enough. We were told on Thursday that she would definitely be there. So this sprain of the back has happened since then. What will be the impact on her programme going forward? I think it's too early to say that. We're told that she will continue with light duties at Windsor.
All right. Thank you, Nicholas Witchell. One person has died and another has been injured after a car exploded outside Liverpool Women's Hospital. This happened about 11 o'clock this morning, although details have only been emerging in the last couple of hours. Let's go to the scene and our correspondent, Phil McCann. What more can you tell us, Phil?
Well, it was a minute before 11 o'clock this morning, Jane, when people in this part of Liverpool heard a very loud bang, and that bang was a car exploding outside one of the main entrances to Liverpool Women's Hospital, just behind me, just around the corner, just out of our shot here, and dramatic pictures within the minutes afterwards appeared on social media, which showed a car, a private hire taxi, clearly well alight. It looked as though it had burst into flames, and within the last hour and a half, the police gave an update to the media.
Unfortunately, I can confirm that one person has died and another has been taken to hospital, where he is being treated for his injuries, which thankfully are not life-threatening. So far, we understand that the car involved was a taxi, which pulled up at the hospital shortly before the explosion occurred. Work is still ongoing to establish what has happened, and could take some time before we're in a position to confirm anything.
Now this is being investigated by counter-terror police, but the Merseyside police insist that is out of caution. They say they're keeping an open mind about what happened here. Some suspicions raised by the fact this happened at around 11 o'clock this morning, of course, on Remembrance Sunday. We know some patients have been diverted from this hospital today, although emergencies have continued to be treated. A street near here has also been cordoned off by Merseyside police. They say there won't be any more details given in the next few hours, but they want people in Liverpool tonight to be vigilant.
Phil McCann, thank you. The president of the COP26 climate conference, Alok Sharma, says India and China will have to justify themselves to the world's most vulnerable countries after the two nations demanded last-minute changes to the climate deal, softening commitments to reduce the use of coal. An agreement was finally reached last night. It says limiting average global temperatures to 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial levels by the year 2100 is still attainable. Scientists have said that amount by then would avoid the worst impacts of climate change. But there is controversy over the pledge about coal, which now says its use should be phased down rather than phased out. The deal pledges more money for poorer countries to help them adapt, and nations will have to republish their climate plans next year to keep what is agreed on track. The conference also agreed to reductions in methane emissions and to curb deforestation across the planet. Here's our science editor, David Shookman.
It was billed as a landmark moment in our relations with the planet, but did the Glasgow conference do anything to limit the rise in temperatures? The man at the centre of the talks, Alok Sharma, had to shuttle between delegations. China and India refusing to allow coal to be phased out. The pressure really showed at one point, and the final wording about coal has left disappointment.
China, India are going to have to explain themselves to the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. This is a fragile win, because at the end of the day, what we need is to ensure that all of these commitments are delivered upon.
So what happens now? Well, by the end of next year, countries should update their climate pledges, a faster pace than before, and they are now expected to do this more often. By 2024, a package of long-term financial aid for the poorest nations should be agreed. And then by 2030, to avoid the worst of global warming, carbon emissions should be halved. But we're still a long way from achieving that.
So as things stand, the polar ice will melt faster than ever, raising sea levels and together with heavier rain, threatening millions of people with flooding. The implications of failing to act soon have never been clearer. We've already warmed by 1.1 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times, and the hope is that 1.5 will be the limit of the rise. But we're heading for at least 1.8, and that's only if every promise is kept. More realistically, we're on course for about 2.4, a really dangerous level.
The difference between 1.5 and 2.4 is really survival of millions and millions of people and species in the planet. This is what is particularly true for the islands.
But according to Camilla Bourne, a government advisor at the heart of the talks, the worst outcomes can be averted.
We have kept 1.5 alive, but on the basis of delivering on those commitments, and that will be our next task for us as the presidency, but for all the countries, and it's on us to make sure that this is real in action.
The key to that is what's happening far beyond the conference. The spectacular fall in the price of renewable forms of energy. They now make good business sense, whatever gets agreed in talks about climate change.
The arguments here over the last fortnight were about words on a page, and in the end they may or may not prove important. What matters more is the signal sent by this gathering and others to come to businesses, investors, banks, all of us, that with the right pace and scale of change, it should still be possible to get the world onto a safer course. David Shukman, BBC News in Glasgow.
Well, as we heard there, India and China faced heavy criticism after demanding those last-minute changes to the climate deal on the issue of coal. India heavily relies on coal for its economic development. Our Southeast Asia correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan reports now on the challenges facing the country in tackling climate change.
India's sacred Yamuna River, a symbol of purity, turned toxic. What looks like harmless bubbles is poisonous foam, much of it caused by industrial waste and sewage. Shakil's a fisherman who lives and works here. All the chemicals are thrown in the river, he tells me. It's disgusting, but it's not a natural disaster. It's humans who've done this.
What we're seeing here, in many ways, represents India's overall challenges when it comes to climate change. One of the country's holiest rivers, now horribly polluted. The cause? Waste from nearby factories. Factories which create jobs and help drive economic growth.
Coal was centre stage at the COP summit, in a similar tussle over the country's economic and environmental needs. Dirty but dependable, it powers this nation, providing some 70% of India's energy and millions of jobs, which is why the country refused to agree to a deal to phase it out completely. Prime Minister Narendra Modi did make a bold pledge to hit net zero emissions by 2070 and asked the West for more investment to fund renewable projects. The aim is to move quickly towards alternative sources like solar, with a goal of generating 50% of power that way by the next decade. Vaibhav Chaturvedi's just returned from the COP summit, where he was advising India's government.
Coal will grow, but solar will grow much faster. So essentially, it's not that only one technology grows and the other does not. Both will have to grow together for meeting the energy demand for this fast-growing economy.
The average Indian consumes far less power than the average Brit or American. Many here say they don't want to be told what to do by Western nations who have a long way to go to phase out fossil fuels themselves. Rajini Vaidyanathan, BBC News, Delhi.
Now to football, and in today's Women's Super League, Chelsea are just a point behind leaders Arsenal after a decisive win over Manchester City. There were also wins for Aston Villa and Brighton. Joe Curry has been watching the action.
A North West derby to kick off the day's fixtures, a moment of reflection and then it was down to business.
This could turn into something for Manchester United.
United struck first. Ella Toone with a curling shot to put the visitors ahead.
Oh, brilliant!
Everton came close to equalising in the first half, but had to wait until late on to eventually find the net.
A calamity at the back for Manchester United.
A mix-up at the back, goalkeeper Mary Earps thought she'd got her hands on the ball, only for Simone McGill to poke it home. A mistake that would cost United the win, as both sides settled for a draw. Manchester City have started the season poorly, and their start in this game was indicative of that form. Less than 2 minutes on the clock, and disaster struck, as Jessie Fleming was gifted the ball, and the Chelsea forward wasn't going to miss from there. And City's poor defending became an unfortunate theme of the game, with Chelsea eventually scoring 4. They're now a point behind leaders Arsenal. City, though, languishing towards the bottom of the table. Joe Curry, BBC News.
And that is it for now. Just to tell you, over on the BBC News channel, you can follow the Prime Minister's news conference about the end of the COP26 climate summit. I'll be back here on BBC One with the main news at 10. Right now, let's join our news teams wherever you are. Bye-bye.